a technical conference before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission in a cause docketed before the Commission as cause number 46322, captioned as the verified joint petition of Northern Indiana Public Service Company, LLC, NIPSCO, and NIPSCO Generation, LLC, GENCO, for 1, approval of a special contract, data center customer number 1 special contract, pursuant to Indiana Code Sections 8-1-2-24 and 8-1-2-25. 2, approval of a power purchase agreement, PPA, between NIPSCO and GENCO. 3, approval of alternative regulatory plans pursuant to Indiana Code Sections 8-1-2.5-5 and 8-1-2.5-6 for both NIPSCO and GENCO. And 4, approval of depreciation accrual rates for generation and transmission assets to be constructed to fulfill the obligations in the data center customer number 1 special contract and PPA. Notice of the time and place of this technical conference was given as provided by law by publication in Marion County in the Indianapolis Star on November 22, 2025, and in Lake County in the Post-Tribune on November 22, 2025, and the Northwest Indiana Times on November 25, 2025. These are newspapers of general circulation, and the publications were made at least 10 days prior to the date of the technical conference. The proofs of publication of the notices have been received by the Commission and are now incorporated into the record of this cause by reference and placed in the official files of the Commission. Notice has also been given to the Indiana Office of Utility Consumer Counselor and other interested parties. May we have appearances, please?
Thank you, Your Honor. On behalf of the joint petitioners, Brian Likens of NiSource Corporate Services.
Thank you, Your Honor. Also on behalf of the petitioner, Nicholas Kyle and Lauren Aguilar of Barnes & Thornburg, LLP.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please accept the appearance of Jennifer Washburn on behalf of Citizens Action Coalition.
And appearing on behalf of the public, Adam Cashin of the Indiana Office of Utility Consumer Counselor.
Thank you, Your Honor. On behalf of petitioning intervener NIPSCO Industrial Group, Todd Richardson and Emily Vlasic of the law firm Lewis & Kappas here in Indianapolis, we did file our petition yesterday, so I guess we're seated at the grace of the Commission and the petitioners.
And I will note, Your Honor, we have no objection to their intervention or their appearance this morning.
Thank you. With that, I also want to, before we go off the record, I wanted to remind the parties that in our docket entry setting this technical conference, that we strongly encourage the parties to collaborate, and I hope that that occurred because we want to minimize the need to discuss confidential information here, and to the extent that we can do that, and we intend to move that direction and stay out of in-camera and out of the confidential information as much as possible for this technical conference. And our staff, in addition to your collaboration, our staff has also worked very hard to phrase their questions and their requests to avoid confidential information as well. So that's the goal today.
May I speak on that for just a minute?
Yes.
So what we've prepared, and in the slide deck that was just provided via email to share, which we have no issue sharing via the live stream as well, and the paper copies that are here, is all public information, and our intent is to stay there. We will have kind of an outline of an agenda. The very last item is if there is a need to get into some technical terms of the special contract and some detailed terms, that would be the in-camera portion, but have talked to the witnesses, so to the extent a question comes and we think that would require, our intent would be to answer that in a public manner, and then if there's a need, maybe to punt those towards the end. I also do have a slide to talk through, a reminder for us as well as others, about kind of what is in the public domain versus what is confidential, to kind of give us a little bit of a guide, doing that per your guidance to do our best to get as much in the public record. But again, some of those detailed confidential settlement terms, special contract terms would require some confidential discussion. And we have a separate presentation that we could pull up and share if we need to get into that detail.
Great. And then also too, we will be relying, because while we aren't transcribing the technical conference, we are streaming, and so it is available to the public, so we will be relying on you all to help us know when you're going to talk about confidential information and to not do it until you warn us so that we can then go in camera. Okay? right, with that, we will go off the record for the technical conference. And Shannon, you've got it? Do you want to start with the slides?
I'll start with some opening comments, and then we'll go to the slides.
Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Dale, and he has a few things he wants to talk about, and then we can go through the slides. Do you need to load it, Shannon? Do you want to go ahead and do that before we start? Yes.
Hi, my name is Dale Thomas. I'm with the technical staff of the commission, and Rich Brunton and I, as well as Jennifer and Blair, will be asking some questions, and Lorraine and David may have some questions, or Commissioner Valletta may have some questions as they join in. But I just wanted to, when we first looked at this, your petition does a very good job of laying out your ask at a high level, specifically paragraphs 7 through 17, and specifically for us, paragraphs 14 and 15 on the alt-reg plan and its subpoints in there. So as a quick look through your slide deck, looks like it follows that same premise. That's pretty much what we would have wanted you to do, was to just run through those asks so that we can understand those, and then we'll just have to figure out how much detail we want now, or how much general understanding we want, or we're looking for, and as well as the other interested stakeholders and parties in this case. So if you want to proceed with your slides, Brian, that'd be great, and then we'll just interject as we need to and open the floor from that. Thank you.
Absolutely, happy to do that. What we thought was outlining just a brief agenda. I do have a slide where we'll introduce the folks that will be speaking, which are our 4 witnesses that are presenting in the case and have offered testimony. And then I will hit a brief reminder on confidential information, kind of what's public and confidential, to hopefully guide the conversation a bit. And again, as we noted earlier, to the extent there's a question asked, we think we're going to go confidential. What our intent would be was to give a public version with as much information, and then say, if you would like some additional, we'll have to go in camera, and or you could submit a docket entry to us or something like that if you want a confidential response, but we'll defer to you all on that. But a quick walkthrough of where we're headed here. So have our witnesses introduce themselves, and as a noted confidentiality reminder, we'll talk just a little bit at a high level about the deal structure and some of those fundamentals from NIPSCO and GENCO's perspective. We have a slide to walk through the NIPSCO-GENCO structure. I know a lot of our folks that are in the room today are probably familiar with that and were involved in our GENCO declination case, but did want to walk through that to make sure we're at least grounded in kind of GENCO 101. Spend some time talking about the customer benefits and that portion of the special contract, which we believe is a real key portion. Walk through the power purchase agreement just a bit. have a couple slides on our alternative regulatory plan requests. And then that's where all of the prepared materials that are in the slide deck that's on the screen, as well as the hard copies, stop. But we do have a separate set of slides on specific kind of concepts and terms in the special contract, really all of which is confidential. We're going to get to those concepts in the public version, but if we need to go there, have a separate presentation that we could bring up and get into. But our intent would be to kind of stop at the public version and make sure we're all grounded there, and then if we need to go deeper, go in camera if need be.
Is it a fair presumption that all of the parties to the case will see the special contract terms, the last item there, after this is over or as a part of this process?
That's correct, Dale. So what we did is use kind of the confidential and highly confidential designations. Any intervener that is a customer of NIPSCO's, we've restricted that access to outside consultants and outside attorneys, but they will have access. We have already provided the full unredacted special contract and power purchase agreement to Citizens Action Coalition, to the Consumer Counselor's Office, the same version that was submitted to the Commission. That also, I believe, either was or will be very shortly provided to the industrial group in the same fashion, so they'll have full access to the entirety of both power purchase agreement and special contract.
In this presentation?
In this presentation, yes. We will also be providing the confidential slides to the folks if there's a desire from the Commission to both file the public version and then confidentially submit the confidential portion for the benefit of staff. We're happy to do that as well. Follow your lead there.
Yeah, if you'll file those, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And we'll file them in separate files.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
for clarity.
Yep, thank you.
Yep. So here we'll not drain the slide in terms of the different points, but wanted to provide a quick introduction. I'll actually just let the witnesses go through, introduce themselves, but added a bullet or two in terms of what their testimony speaks to generally. Have planned material for each of them to speak to here, but let me just have each of the witnesses introduce themselves if they would.
I'll start. Vince Parisi, president of NIPSCO.
Gunnar Gody, SVP and Chief Accounting Officer.
Carl Stanley, VP Supply and Optimization.
Nick Phillips with Atrium Economics.
And you'll be hearing from each of these folks. Vince is going to do the heavy lifting here for us, but just noting in addition to the testimony that was filed and obviously a verified petition, we have the NIPSCO Amazon special contract, which was filed, and now the customer name has been made public, and we updated Vince's testimony to disclose the name of that, as there was a press release by Amazon after the initial filing here. The power purchase agreement is obviously attached, and then one of the commitments in our GenCo declination was to provide a revised FERC standards of conduct on affiliate guidelines. Don't intend to get into those details today, but if there's a desire, we obviously could. But just briefly, again, won't drain the slide completely, but wanted to remind folks in terms of what's public versus what's non-public. So on the left-hand side is intended to be mirrored on the right-hand side, and really it's the more general information on the left as opposed to more specific information on the right. So when we talk about the total investment, both by NIPSCO and then what Amazon has recently announced, that would be public as opposed to specifics on what's generation versus transmission investment is non-public. The start of that ramp as opposed to the more granular quarterly or annual ramp of the customer coming online would be non-public. What we've disclosed about the generation is generally speaking the generation resources there on the left. Amazon has announced the Hobart data center location versus any other potential data center locations have not been disclosed. The $1 billion customer credit is a number that we've grounded ourselves in versus a more granular annual breakdown or how that's broken apart in terms of different charges and things like that. And then also gave examples here of, call it, the concepts of some contractual terms we're going to talk through today in the public version, as opposed to really the more specific of annual amounts, dollar per kW charges, how the exact pricing mechanisms are broken down, and some of those sorts of things are confidential. So again, follow your lead in terms of getting as far as we can in the public domain and have that all prepared here. But if we get there, we'll give some caution and go in camera if need be.
So whenever I see on this, I'm sorry, just one clarification. Other pass-through charges, the names of the other pass-through charges are public?
They are not, Dale. What we in essence have said is capacity charge and then certain pass-through charges that includes, energy charge and an existing system charge, but there's some more granularity to that has not been disclosed publicly.
So we need to phrase those as pass-through charges.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
But with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Vince. I'll do the clicker unless you want to. Yeah, I'll go and take it. All right, you take the clicker. Going to have some opening remarks here from Vince as we start, and then jump right into the slide deck.
Good morning, and first just want to thank everybody for taking the time and for the commission providing us the opportunity for a technical conference. This is a little different than historically, I think, what we've seen. We really wanted to try to create something that hit on a number of points. We'll get into some of those details, but you know, early on, we found there was a significant desire by large load customers to come onto our system. Our system is about 2,400 megawatts, and some of this load could exceed that. We'll see that in the discussion we'll have today. And what we really needed to do, and from the conversations that we had kind of building this, I think there was a significant desire to do, was find a way to allow that load to come into the state, provide the benefit that comes from the large load customers, but do it in a way that protects our existing customer base from those costs, and if possible, provide value back to our customers in the system. I think we found that through this GenCo approach and the special contract with the PPA, we're really able to separate each of those pieces in a way that is unique. It's different than I think what we've seen historically, really allows us to meet the speed to market component that's important for these large load customers, but do it in a way where our customers don't take on the cost or the exposure associated with that new generation and associated build. So we can jump into the slides, but just wanted to start with a thank you to everyone and kind of set that up a little bit. When you look at the first slide, we really kind of developed through those advanced conversations 4 pillars that were pretty critical to ensuring that we'd be able to move forward with large load customers on our system. The first was in protecting our existing customer base and providing some material benefits. The GenCo structure allows us to separate, not just from a financial accounting perspective, but also from a risk perspective, that new generation build and that new load from our existing customers. So we, I think we've talked about this later on, but we'll be able to invest $6 to $7 billion in our system in new capacity. 100% of the new capacity costs that will be associated with this customer will be paid for by the customer and will not go back to our core customers. There'll also be a use of system charge that we'll talk a bit about that ultimately over the 15 years of the contract will go back to our customers on a monthly basis. We think that creates substantial benefit for our customer base in that they will benefit from the large load customer coming onto the system, the new generation that's going to be built, and get those monthly credits back without having to take on the risk of that. We're matching our terms of our PPA. So the way the structure will work, and we have a chart in here later that we'll talk about, but we'll match the power purchase agreement that we'll have with GenCo to the terms of the special contract so that when those risks that exist in the contract ultimately between NIPSCO and the customer occur, they really shift over to GenCo, so that GenCo ultimately carries when it comes to the capacity or, for example, the payments that are being made. All of those will sit over on the GenCo side. So that helps us separate the risk to our core customers, our existing customers, from the new build. At the end of contract, one of the other things that we heard was that there was a desire to not have a stranded asset risk for our customers. We won't get into the specific details, but the contract between us and Amazon takes care of that. There's components throughout the contract and throughout the life of the 15-year agreement that ultimately there will be no risk with respect to our core customers of end-of-life contract and capacity charges. And then the $1 billion. I say $1 billion, and it's hard to really understand the magnitude of $1 billion. But what that ultimately translates into is a significant credit starting in 2027 that will ramp up through 2032, which is the ramp period. And then from the 2032 until the end of the contract life, will sit at a minimum charge and can go up higher from there, depending on the customer usage. So that was one of the core tenets that we had to have in place for us to be confident that we could bring this load onto our system and do it in a way that really takes into consideration our existing customer base and allows for that growth in the state. Speed to market was a critical component for every one of the customers or potential customers that we spoke to. They have a huge need for new generation. There's more need behind this, and we wanted to build something that ultimately could enable us to move quickly. In a traditional, completely traditional regulated concept, we do a lot in advance through the commission to ultimately get the orders in place, and then we'll go out and take steps in the market to ultimately effectuate those. One of the issues with that is there's long lead time equipment that ultimately needs to be secured to be able to meet the need that the customer has to go quickly. This structure enabled us to go out and ultimately put in place deposits to be able to have a clear line of sight to be able to meet that capacity, so that when we bring the customer on the system, we have the capacity to meet that customer's ramp. It was important to the process. Multiple folks had said, if you can figure out those first two pieces, it would be also great that if NIPSCO could do it in a way where NIPSCO didn't take on a significant amount of new risk associated with this. Having GenCo set up as a separate company allows us to shift that risk over to GenCo, so that in the event something happens, really it becomes a GenCo event and not a NIPSCO event, which enables us to continue to serve our customers through really any situation. And it was important to us, and I think it was important to folks that we spoke to going in, that we continue to do this through a regulated process. We don't have a desire to open up the GenCo as an IPP or to go out and operate competitively in the market. GenCo's only customer will be NIPSCO. GenCo will develop generation and or acquire generation necessary to meet the large load customer need, and that's the purpose of that entity. So I'll pause there just in case there are questions on that, and then we can move into the next.
I do have one, and I'll try to do this properly, so let me know if I don't. There is effectively a capacity obligation between GenCo and the special contract between Amazon, right? They're going to provide capacity to them, and capacity inherently brings risk. Is the risk that may occur or could occur under that arrangement transferred to the contracting structure and the PPA structure in a way that it sits at GenCo and not at NIPSCO?
It is. In the PPA, what we attempted to do, and I think we did a decent job of this, is really mirror the provisions that are in the special contract, so that to the extent that there is a risk that NIPSCO ultimately would pick up in the special contract between us and the customer, ultimately that risk would then be reflected back into the PPA, so that ultimately NIPSCO's obligations would shift and or would be picked up in that PPA between us and GenCo.
So in my loud term use, pass-through charges, if there's a pass-through from, let's say, NIPSCO, or from NIPSCO to the special contract customer, that pass-through would exist as well?
That's right.
GenCo flowing to NIPSCO, that equivalent or near equivalent pass-through?
Yeah, that's correct. So especially on the capacity side, you'll see in the special contract all of those appropriate shifts. Probably should have left the clicker with Brian. So just some general overview of the Amazon special contract. The deal, ultimately, load side is 2,400 megawatts of load. We'll build 3,000 megawatts of new generation ultimately to support that load. If I say we, when I'm talking about capacity, GenCo will build 3,000 megawatts of generation to be able to support that 2,400 megawatts of load. The beginning of the ramp is in 2027. The ramp will run through the 2032 period, and that's where it'll ramp up to the 2,400 megawatts. And we'll have corresponding obligations in the contract to ultimately have the generation in place to be able to meet each of those ramp periods. As you can see on here, we'll build 1,300 megawatts of combined cycle gas turbines. That's two 1,300 megawatt CCGTs and 400 megawatts of batteries, so all dispatchable generation that'll be built to ultimately meet this load. That will enable the pace ultimately that customer needs, as well as provide dispatchable generation given just the load and the nature of the customer. Our estimate is between $6 and $7 billion with respect to what we'll invest. GenCo and NIPSCO with respect to this special contract, and $1 billion of direct savings that will ultimately go back to our customers through that customer charge. Through the special contract and the PPA approach, we've negotiated a beneficial contract to both NIPSCO and its traditional customer base. As we kind of saw on that last slide, the $1 billion that goes back to our customers. We have a fixed capacity payment charge in this agreement that's such an annual payment for generation, regardless of really what the customer's ultimately using. So it won't vary based on usage or capacity factor. And then our contract provisions that have minimum terms, there's termination obligations, credit support, parental guarantee, kind of all of those components are within the terms of the agreement.
If I'm clear in my understanding of the ask of GenCo and NIPSCO in this case, the inclusion of these identified resources or not approval of these identified resources, correct?
That's
in terms of the like 183 flow of information.
That's correct. And we do intend, we haven't said this, but it's fine to disclose, in the next 30 to 60 days, we intend for GenCo to make the filings required per the settlement agreement, where they would seek either that commission approval or declination with respect to these resources. So we're working on that and expect to submit it here in the next month or two.
Thank you.
So on this slide, we're talking a bit about the generation. Again, the benefits in local jobs are significant. We'll employ, GenCo will employ through the process some 2,000 construction jobs that'll really start this coming year and run through 2032. So 6-7 years of significant employment, local trades, ultimately that we'll be able to use. Amazon has noted that their investment of $15 billion that'll be made in Northwest Indiana will create 1,100 permanent jobs with respect to that part of the facility as well. Significant tax base when you think about $6 to $7 billion that we'll invest, and the tax base that'll go with that in those local communities is significant, as well as the tax base ultimately that will be negotiated between Amazon and those local communities. So both in jobs as well as tax base, there's a significant additional value that's ultimately going to be generated through this process. Oops. So the next slide is really an illustration of the GenCo structure, so that you really can see how the separation exists. On the left-hand side, or my left-hand side, is our current customer base. So you can see that NIPSCO will continue to serve our current customer base with the generation assets that we have, continue to go through IRP processes to understand what those future needs will be. Customers will continue to pay for just those assets and nothing on the right-hand side. And NIPSCO will continue to provide that electric service. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the GenCo organization. Ultimately, that's a sister company to NIPSCO, sits under the NiSource umbrella. We'll have a PPA between GenCo and NIPSCO that will provide the details of the relationship between NIPSCO and GenCo, primarily to ensure that we have the capacity that we need to serve those large load customers. The customer will pay for all of the costs associated with the generation and transmission side of the build, and will also pay this use of system charge. That use of system charge will be a direct pass-through that will go to customers, as we talked about, on a monthly basis, and that'll start in 2027.
Thank you. If I was to apply a financing overlay on this chart, and the way these both NIPSCO and GenCo are to be financed, or likely to be financed, I would see something similar to the dotted line that exists between GenCo and NiSource as the financing for GenCo.
That's correct.
And the security for that is effectively the PPA and or the special contract?
That's right. Multiple different ways to finance this. NIPSCO won't be involved in the financing components. All of that will happen through the NiSource vertical. CFO and NiSource will ultimately determine the best way to finance those assets.
And while we look at the, there has been some expressed interest in understanding the risk to NiSource and therefore to NIPSCO through this extra financing structure. And we can often think here in Indiana about NIPSCO's size and scale, NIPSCO Electric in particular, size and scale in relation to the NiSource financing capacity. GenCo, if you were to give me some sort of a percentage or an understanding of what the financing financing share of GenCo is to NiSource, could you help me understand that a little bit more? Just try to understand some of the potential financing risk to the parent.
Yeah, and I may ask Gunnar to weigh in a bit on this one. If you think about NIPSCO, we talk about 2,300 megawatts being the size of our electric system. NIPSCO is also the largest natural gas provider in the state, about 900,000 customers there. And then NIPSCO holistically is a part of, to your point, a larger company. We have operating companies in Ohio, Kentucky, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, in addition to here in Indiana. So is a portion of that. So when you think about the size of GenCo compared to just NIPSCO Electric, you can get kind of an understanding of how that proportion is. So NIPSCO would remain the largest company in the portfolio from multiple different metrics. And then maybe I'll kick it over to Gunnar if you have any thoughts on the specific percentages.
Yeah, and so just to make sure I'm understanding the question, trying to understand the relative size that GenCo will be in the future versus the other entities?
Well, in this structure, right, NiSource is going to be bigger, right? They've got another 3 gigawatts of generation that they're going to finance effectively through GenCo. So I'm just trying to understand, as they get bigger, how much bigger is NiSource going to be, and therefore I understand NIPSCO's Electric's context and size in terms of NiSource and the financing vehicle that NiSource financing is. So I'm just trying to understand how that influences what level of risk is that, right? I mean, if I'm driving a big car and I buy a second car, I double my risk, right? I presume I'm not doing that here because of Columbia Gas and other large entities that are part of NiSource. So I'm just trying to understand what that scale is.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure about a percentage to give to you, but what I would say is, so the investment, as we've said, is around $7 billion that will be needed to fund the assets that are there. But as you mentioned, fully supported by the customer contract. And so the cash flows that are underlying that contract and the protections within that contract go to support that $7 billion that will be invested for those new assets.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of gets to the gist of my wanting to understand the flow of cash, both of the contract and both through the contract and the PPA, because in the middle of that are the captive customers, right? The core customers, I think, as Vince called them, the existing customers rather than data centers. So trying to understand in essence, they are securing in some fashion, granted sub-secured by the special contract, which is critically important, but under ensuring that that risk transfers nearly completely through the structure will provide me, and I presume the commission and other stakeholders, and with a level of comfort that the risk being taken on isn't being taken on by NIPSCO's customers.
And I think we can take a look at percentages. As an overall percentage of the overall company, it still remains a relatively small percentage. We're not getting into the 30, 40, 50% or anything kind of close to that. We have 3.2 million, I think, gas customers, 500,000 electric customers. So from that, you can kind of see the scope. Ohio has 1.5 million customers. This becomes a separate operating company and will operate as a separate company in the organization. So good day or bad day, that focuses on Genco alone and really won't impact NIPSCO or the other operating companies. We'd have to grow up pretty substantially to get to a place where it was even, I think, rivaling the size of NIPSCO.
And Dale, in terms of if there's follow-up, whether it be docket entry or we could proactively submit something, if you're looking at, let's say, total investment that NiSource is intending to make that we've announced either publicly or could do it confidentially between 2025 and the end of 2032 across the corporation, and then showing the $7 billion we're estimating as part of that, if that would be helpful, we could do something like that. I know we don't have those numbers handy, but could answer something along those lines, as well as there are some specific provisions that we could point to, maybe without getting into the specifics of the parental guarantee and those sorts of things, obviously backstopped by someone like Amazon, because there's a significant, protection there in terms of the way that works. And if we want to get into the actual details of the numbers, it's a very good story in terms of the parental guarantee versus some of the others. Would need to go in camera to do that, but happy to do that because I do think that would give you comfort if we get into some of those numbers.
Yeah, Gunnar shaped it well whenever he talked about the $7 billion investment. So if I was to, and maybe I should know this, but I don't, what NiSource's enterprise value is, right? Absent that should give me a good scale on what is NIPSCO's enterprise value.
Around 20 billion.
Thank you.
So just wanted to touch a bit more and maybe a little bit more granular on the customer overall benefits. I think I mentioned, but a 15-year contract with the Amazon contract. There'll be $1 billion to go back to customers over the life of that contract, starting in 2027 and ramping up through 2032. 100% of those dollars will go directly back to customers. Our intent is to create a line item on the bill so customers can see that credit come back each month. Once it is at its full ramp, it'll be $7 to $9 per month per residential customer. And in the application and supporting documents, we break it down further.
I guess just using, I'm sorry, feel free to ask any other questions, anybody, please. But as I understand, you mentioned a more line item idea, right? I presume that is, in effect, a line item on the bill that Amazon will get, right? It's granted, it's rolled into all the charges, I'm sure, and it's going to come with their regular bill. But it's effectively a line item not influenced by other things, other than, well, not influenced all that much, at least in its minor value or scale or its banded values, I guess, from as I understand some reading, right? Is that fair? It's a line item. It's not if they make money, it goes here. It's a line item that's based on a measurable thing.
Yeah, that's fair. It'll be a line item on their bill. Kick me if I'm getting into anything confidential. I won't go specific, but there are some components that could make it vary a bit month to month. But ultimately, it'll be a clear line item that will be something that can be audited. Oh, I'm going to pass it over to Nick.
Thank you. So the proposed mechanism to pass back the credit is going to be a new rider, a semi-annual rider, established to make sure that the dollars are passed back to the customers as quickly as possible, as opposed to perhaps waiting to each general rate case to reflect those And as we just talked about, it'll be reflected as an individual line item on each customer's bill as well. We are looking at a different method for different customer classes to pass back the charges. So for the residential customers, as an example, it would be a per customer, per meter pass back. For some of the customers that don't have a customer charge built into their current rate, it would be done on a $1 per kW basis or a $1 per lamp basis. This ensures that there's a relatively even distribution back between the customers within the customer classes. These are all fixed charges, so it would not make sense to pass it back on a volumetric per kWh charge basis. And in terms of the lower income population within the residential customer class, ensures that they are going to make sure to get an equivalent share as any other customer within the residential customer class. On this next slide, what we have is a breakdown of the proposed allocation methodology to distribute the funds received through the special service contract back to the individual customer classes before setting out the appropriate rate design. We're proposing a revenue-based allocation back of the special service contract revenues received for the use of the shared system. Here on the screen, we can see those individual percentages, and the plan is for each rate case. At the end of each rate case, you'll see a schedule like this. The interdepartmental use for NIPSCO would be removed, and then the revenues for each customer class would be adjusted after the removal of those interdepartmental revenues, and dollars would be allocated to each of the classes then according to the revenues coming out of each rate case. Similarly, on the right-hand side of this table, you'll see the proposed denominator or the proposed billing units used to pass back for each individual customer class. Again, the starting point was these are fixed charges. We're not going to look at a consumption-based pass back, and so we wanted to tie for each individual rate schedule, underlying that rate schedule, what the fixed charge recovery mechanism was, and then pass back the dollars associated with these credits in that same manner.
And my understanding is that this, including its allocation, the mechanism itself, is a direct ask in this case, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you.
So also on this slide, we wanted to touch on a customer fund that we've included in the application. This is a fund that will be paid for by NIPSCO and GenCo and the shareholders. It's a $15 million fund that'll grow kind of consistent with the Amazon load growth, so that it'll get to it'll level out when we get to 2032. Intended to be $15 million over the life of the 15-year contract. And at this point, we haven't specified how those dollars will be used. We're open to stakeholder input on how we can make that most impactful.
That is a below-the-line, the NIPSCO component is a below-the-line funding, correct?
That's correct. So we've touched a bit on the PPA already. What we really did with the PPA was intended to mirror the terms that are in the special contract between NIPSCO and Amazon, so that the risks are shifted through that PPA back over to GenCo. So on this, the pricing is going to be a little bit different than what would maybe a traditional PPA. It's going to mirror the terms that are in the structure of the special contract. We did separate. I think when we had the GenCo, I was the president of GenCo. We've put a new president of GenCo in place to be able to have that separation. So we negotiated those terms of the PPA with sort of the fundamental tenet that we wanted to make sure that the risks matched up with the special contract, and so that for the most part, NIPSCO would be insulated from the risks of those terms and conditions, and those would shift over to NIPSCO through the PPA. Over to GenCo through the PPA.
I guess I don't want to jump ahead of the next slide, but I didn't see it there. I presume the PPA approval request, which is a direct, of course, ask in this case, is basically asking for a waiver of the D1. It's going to be recovered through the FAC or right along the FAC through a 42A tracker and be have the D1 test waived for its length.
So we're not proposing to recover through the FAC. It's going to be a direct recovery solely through the special contract. So there would be no need to push it through the FAC as we do our normal, renewable PPAs and those sorts of things.
And where will the visibility be for the commission and others to see the flow through? Just that it's nil and it doesn't show up anywhere, or will there be an actual showing somewhere, regular filings that show us that everything did pass through?
Yeah, I think what you would see is whether it be the RA tracker where capacity would be recovered, or the FAC where you would see energy or the PPA recovery, you would see that it is not included there. We're not proposing a specific compliance filing from that perspective, but if there was a desire in quarterly FAC, semi-annual FAC, annual when we do our hedging plan or those sorts of things to provide some line of sight, I don't think we would have any opposition or concern with doing it in that way. But really it would be a direct recovery so that it is separated from, and then obviously when we come in our base rate cases, there would be line of sight to see all of those costs are excluded, both the cost and expense and the revenues are excluded appropriately, which is part of the ARP ask that we'll get to in a moment. But again, to the extent there's a desire for compliance filing or something along those lines for better visibility, I don't know that we'd have any opposition to that.
Mike, April, you guys want that? You want a varying, if you will, in each FAC filing that the full costs have flown through and they're not being included in some other capacity in the FAC? I mean, from what they've said, the PPA, normal PPA, flows through a 42A tracker that runs through the FAC, and they include that. They get a 8.8 waiver for the D1 test, basically, so it's not subject to the lowest reasonable cost requirements that normally flow through the FAC. In this case, it's not going to be reflected. All of the charges, as it's presented, are going to flow directly external to the FAC, if you will, perhaps through some other cost trackers. But in the FAC, any of those charges from the PPA won't be reflected. I mean, I guess I would be fond of you varying in each of those FACs that none of those PPA charges are in there. But I presume you guys would be open to that. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I'm not asking for a commitment or anything. Certainly. But it would be attractive, I presume.
And especially, Dale, if it's as simple as a representation by a witness who is, putting their name on the testimony, zero concern whatsoever. And even if there was a compliance filing top obligation, so that you can see where the cost recovery is flowing, again, directly and solely recovered from Amazon in this case, open to that as well.
Super.
So wanted to provide a couple of examples.
Not a commitment, of course, because we're in a technical conference, but thank you.
Fair enough. So I wanted to just provide a couple of examples where the PPA risk shift occurs, so you can see that, to the extent that for some reason the customer didn't make payments under the special contract, NIPSCO would be alleviated from having to make payments over to GenCo. If there are liquidated damages associated with capacity costs, obviously those would shift over to GenCo as well. The term of the contract is the same. Termination rights that exist within the special contract are also in the PPA between the parties. With respect to the transmission, that is something NIPSCO will take on. The cost associated with building the load side will be covered by the customer, but ultimately NIPSCO is going to be the service provider, so we'll build and construct the transmission, retain the payments associated with that, but then all the other dollars would flow through, minus the dollars that are going to be going back to customers.
And I guess I'll use this technical conference to learn from you all, because I like to do that. But one of the ongoing discussions is the fact that, yes, they're going to pay for their, we'll call it direct transmission costs, but the transmission system itself may need to be upgraded. Right? Those are things that will still flow through the MISO tariffs and flow through those sorts of things. And part of the shared services, or the shared savings, arguably goes to cover part of that, or potentially cover that, right? As those general transmission charges from the RTO grow, because the system is growing, partially because of the data center customers, right? That's not reflected in this investment that is being talked about here for transmission, right? This is their connection.
That's correct. The substation, any work that we would need to do ultimately to connect them to the grid and then them to us, all those costs would be part of what is covered here. To the extent the system itself needs a build out, then that ultimately would, that benefits all customers, then that would go through a traditional approach.
And I'll note, Dale, just for clarity, we have not identified any, call it, back into the system type transition upgrades that were required by this. Really, the amounts that we've specified in the transmission investment are all the investments needed to get the customer up and running at the full load. And then, as we've broken down the charges separately, just suffice it to say there is recognition that MISO charges associated with this customer should be paid for by this customer. So there's that piece of it. Obviously, we would not, for example, incur additional charges and push them through an RTO tracker for base customers. There's separation in that way as well.
But, I mean, as you've already mentioned, the Hobart site, for example, that, as I understand it, is being studied by MISO through their processes. They haven't identified any, or if any, additional system upgrades are required for that, right?
They haven't specifically, but to the extent they would, those are going to be assigned to Amazon if it is a upgrade MISO identifies to get that load online, is included in the transmission estimate that we've included. Understand it's a kind of round number. Those sorts of charges to bring that load online are going to be covered by Amazon directly. We're not going to seek a system-wide recovery of those.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that wasn't my understanding, so that's
Yeah, and again, a differentiating factor. We're not just talking the substation.
Sure,
we're talking about identified costs to bring all their load online at specific locations that we've estimated. Understanding still studies have to be done. We've done ours, but MISO has to do theirs. We're looking for direct assignment if there's not a system.
So on the next slide, we want to talk a little bit about the ARP request. Obviously, the multiple components to it. We need the ability to pass back the benefits that we've talked about to our customers. The purpose is to insulate our customers as well as NIPSCO from the capacity investment and associated investments. We also want and need to be able to attract capital to do all of this. And then allow for the appropriate gap recognition. So those are the four, I think, main components of the ARP that we'll be seeking.
Yeah, thanks. And so three core ARP requests that are there. One Nick talked about earlier on the allocation of the customer credit. Next one is the one that I sponsor related to the financial aspect and the revenue recognition aspect of it. And then lastly, some additional alternative services to be provided, non-utility services to be provided potentially by NIPSCO to the customer. Getting into my, the accounting related.
I'm sorry. Gunnar, can you help me understand that one a little bit more to the extent you can, the incidental services?
Sorry, do you want to cover that one? The
water. Are we talking about the water? Okay.
And just to note, Vince, the specific location has been redacted, so just talk generally.
It's possible that one of the locations could be at a place where NIPSCO has water available. In that event, we would ultimately want to be able to provide that through the special contract to the customer, and that would be kind of an incidental that we'd want to be able to manage through the special contract. Does that hit on it?
Yes, and there's some citations and those sorts of things, some prior cases from the commission where we believe the only reason we're providing this is because we're providing electric service to them as well, that it would fall under kind of one of those exceptions. So a bit of belt and suspenders there. We believe it's a non-issue, but wanted to specifically ask for it to make the commission aware and stakeholders aware from that perspective. But that's call it an ARP, and then in the event needed, a declination of jurisdiction if you actually thought it was provision of utility water service. We're not looking to become NIPSCO Water Utility. We already have GenCo. We don't need another subsidiary here.
And that is a specific ask here, or is that the idea it might, and then you'll have to ask?
It is a specific ask here, as there's a provision in the special contract that says to the extent that they do end up locating there, we would provide that service, but it's obviously subject to the commission's approval of the request in this case.
Thank you.
Okay, so getting into the accounting ARP, a few key parts to it. One, as it's stated there, this doesn't have any impact on the actual cash flows or amounts to be billed to and or received from the customer. The second one is, part of the impetus behind it is to allow us to attract and secure the capital necessary to build and invest the $7 billion in the assets that are there from customers or from investors. And I think then another key part to it is it allows us to recognize revenue pretty much in accordance with the cash flows of the contract and the payment stream that's allowed for within the contract. I think the key part there is that QIP approval. So in normal course, you'd recognize revenue along the times as you're providing service. The contract provides for and was specifically included cash flows before service was provided to allow for us to craft a QIP and alternative revenue program under 980 to recognize revenue under that GAP standard as construction is being built. I think the last part that's here that we talk about is really, and we kind of mentioned it before, all of these revenues related to the special contract will be separated out, and that's the other part of this, is to note that we'll keep it separate, both this part that's on NIPSCO related to their transmission assets that they build, and then of course everything within GenCo will be within its own separate segment and outside of any rate case or base rates within that go as we go forward.
And as I understand it, the need for a GenCo ARP is because of the limited declination that the commission approved in 46183? I mean, if we had declined jurisdiction, you wouldn't need this ARP, right? You'd already have it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the sense that it's regulated.
That is the end of the public materials, and we assume there would be some questions from commission and staff, so wanted to pause there. And then we do have the additional materials, which are confidential in nature, and can send that presentation and talk through that in an in-camera session if there's a desire to get into specifics of some of the contractual terms. We didn't know what your desire would be in terms of staying with structure and concepts and those sorts of things versus actually walking through some of the key terms that get into more of the weeds and more of the details. So we'll defer to your preference in terms of where we go next.
Yeah, I mean, the commission's preference is identified in the docket entry is for everyone to hear what we're talking about, right? And for us to be fully transparent and for the structure to be understood. The details we all have access to, and I'm sure we'll explore those as we can. And certainly, this isn't my technical conference, it's everybody's technical conference, so I'll yield to anybody else who want to ask any questions or from parties, staff. Jennifer?
Yes, please. Just had a couple questions. Following up on the water aspect of this, could you help us understand, without revealing the confidential site, how much water are we talking about?
So I do not have estimates at this point with respect to that. Trying to think if there's anything out there publicly. That any water that we provide would be within the parameters of the rights that we have today, so it wouldn't exceed those rights, but I don't have the specifics on how much water.
Okay, thank you. And are you talking about like water withdrawal from nearby, or when you're talking about the rights?
Rights that we have, yeah, okay, without getting into anything specific.
Thank you. And is the water treated, and what happens to the wastewater?
I don't have those specifics. That would ultimately be, details that we would figure out if that site becomes one that ultimately is selected.
Okay. But that is something that we're deciding in this case about the water issue?
I think just with respect to the water rights itself.
Okay. But hopefully we'll have the details to make that determination within the case.
Yeah, I would note, if you want to submit discovery, the specifics, there's a lot of things that would vary. If you imagine a location that is going to be very small in terms of data center size versus that could be very large in terms of number of megawatts, going to significantly impact. But there would be a desire to provide some potable water in terms of, buildings and office and that sort of thing. And then there would be a desire to do wastewater as well, but can get into the specifics, whether it be discovery or setting up a one-on-one with the folks that are involved there, a little more technical in nature than I know at least Vince is comfortable with and that I know for sure.
Sure, thank you. And I just had one other question. To the extent the assets that you're going to be procuring and building are going to have a useful life longer than the length of the contract, can you help me understand what's going to happen to the assets? Is the commission going to retain jurisdiction? Will NIPSCO have a right to match the purchase price, so on and so forth?
There are provisions in the agreement that we can get into. They're confidential, but there are provisions that ultimately kind of look at all different scenarios with respect to end of life. So depending on the assets, ultimately they're matched up to the contract or beyond the contract. If at the end there are assets available and they don't continue, then there are provisions that ultimately take care of that. We haven't precluded that they could potentially come back to the system, but that would be a decision that would be made at that time, and not by NIPSCO alone.
Thank you.
Follow up on a couple of Jennifer's good questions. I presume the whole idea of water rights at this construct is that you historically have done a lot of generation that uses water. And as those needs may be reduced, there may be another use for that, and one of those could be for a data center, for example. Is that kind of what I'm understanding?
That's fair.
And then to the second part, any of the, I presume that these agreements that were set for approval here don't do anything to alter the obligations that were made in 46183 about end of life in particular.
Nothing in here does.
Thank you. Todd, you had a whole day to prepare, no questions?
Nothing from us. We'll be studying carefully over the next 6 weeks or so.
April, anything else for you guys? All right. Sure. Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, I would just say, before I turn it back over to Judge Seyfried, that thank you. Thank you for making it informative and available. So thank you for that, everybody, all of the parties.
Yeah, and thank you for making this opportunity, and thanks for everyone spending some time with us on a Friday.
Thank you, everyone, and you don't have to stick around for the court reporter. I'll have her come back down and we'll just adjourn it, and then we'll continue on with our procedural schedule. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.